Do we have a show for you today? No Spin Live. We're going to be talking about the CDC just warned about medical tourism in Tijuana. Katie Price is selling her old underwear and breast implants. Breast implant litigation in December ends in a poor outcome for the plaintiff. And finally, last but not least, France is gathering data now on Allergan textured breast implants, and the data hearing will be in February. So we've got a great group of experts here to talk to you and give you their insights on these topics. We've got Dr. Bruce Van Natta from Indianapolis, Indiana. Bruce, sorry about the Colts. They had a good run. Jason Pozner from Boca Raton, Florida. The Dolphins didn't have a run, but sorry about them too, Jason. And Brad Calobrace from Louisville, Kentucky. Brad, let's talk about the Derby, right?
Yeah, it's coming up, May.
All right, well listen, let's get into it. So, you know, Jason, you sent me this clip. I want you to start out with it. It's the CDC just warning against, we've talked about medical tourism a lot. It's still going on. There's patients still being hurt. We had the death we talked about, the lady that was from actually the Texas area. It was tragic. But the CDC were warned about undergoing surgery, cosmetic surgery in Tijuana. So Jason, lead it off.
No, Bill, I sent you this clip because we have done so many stories on medical tourism. And what I'm always afraid of is that the consumer would look at our stories on medical tourism and say, well, you just don't want them to go to Tijuana to have surgery because you're going to miss out on the surgery and you want them to spend the money, with you instead of going to another country. And I understand that. But when the CDC says something, you better believe it, and I would listen to them. When the CDC says, don't have surgery somewhere because there's a high risk of infection, I think that's really telling us something. And this is just the first one that I've ever seen that said, don't go to surgery in a specific country because there's a high risk of this one Pseudomonas bacteria. So that's just adding some more credibility to what we've said a lot of times, is that you have to be careful for medical tourism. There's a lot of good doctors out there that do medical tourism, but just you have to be careful about shopping for price because you never know what's going to happen if you go to some place that may be filled with some unsavory characters. So just buyer beware.
Yeah, so Brad, you've talked about this a lot too, and I mean it's a vitamin though, because there's still patients out there that are enticed by it. It's like a vacation for them. They go, they have their surgery. It's not, the surgery doesn't cost that much, but there's a lot of issues. So what are your comments?
Yeah, I think we've all seen patients like that, and the problem is they're there for a while. They usually are shocked at the conditions often that they get into. The cleanliness, the kinds of rooms that they would be used to in the United States is not what they experience there. And then they come back and they start having problems. Well, the deal is they can't go back, they can't get back. And so we generally tend to manage them and kind of get them through their recovery time, which really isn't right because I don't even know what really happened to them. And they can have pretty devastating results. I've had patients who came and their breast implants were truly falling out of their breast, and they had really infected, and they were septic and sick in addition. And so I think that you just don't have your physician close to you to sort of manage it. It doesn't mean there's not some good doctors there, but the conditions are not what patients are used to. And then you lose all of the controls that we have in the United States for the regulations of our operating rooms and certifications for good reasons, because we want to have our patients in the safest environment. So I think that it's just a horrible idea to leave the country and go and have surgery and have to leave and come back and not knowing what's going to happen, and your doctors aren't even close.
Bruce, you get the final say on this one.
Well, I would just obviously echo what both Jason and Brad had to say, but I think maybe we have talked about this a lot, and I think we focused on the fact that you don't know what you're getting surgically, but this is really about the facility itself.
Yes.
Cleanliness and picking up a bug that we may not even be able to get rid of, and that's a really scary thing. And then the notion that they're bringing that back to the States, and you think about the ripple effect that could have. So yeah, you get what you pay for, but there's multiple reasons not to pursue medical tourism.
Yeah, I think those are all very salient. And you add up the benefits and trade-offs, all these things. When I talk about procedures, but man, the trade-offs stack up pretty high compared to any really minimal benefits. So I think those are great comments. I'm sure we'll be talking about it again. All right, so let's get on to the next story. This is really an odd story. Katie Price had a driving ticket apparently. apparently, I don't know what happened to all her money. I mean, she was a well-known model for many years, but she apparently couldn't pay it. So she's selling her old used underwear and breast implants, which I've never seen before. Bruce, we'll stick with you. What are your initial comments?
Well, multiple. I mean, this is just so ridiculous. First of all, she was driving her $133,000 pink Range Rover. How is it she can't come up with the cash to pay for this? And she's clearly paying somebody to keep those lips really plumped up if you look at her photos. So I think it's more of a publicity stunt maybe, and it's really kind of pathetic.
Brad, used underwear, used breast implants.
Yeah, I know. It's a nice combination there. So, you know, I just wonder what the going rate is for something like that, and what she thought somebody would do with those. So I think, you know, I mean, clearly I think it's just publicity and it's sort of outrageous, and that's probably mostly what it is. Really, then I think that she needs the extra cash immediately, and so she thought her breast implants would be the thing she would sell. Why did she have them in the first place? So that's the real question.
Yeah, well, Jason, I mean, if the underwear weren't used, would you consider buying them, or?
I've been listening to this. So we talked a little bit about Instagram before we got on this, you know, on this recording. So on my Instagram page, I'm going to have a link to an eBay auction where I'm going to sell the fat that got taken out of my eyelids when I had my bleph.
Yeah.
I might have some of the underwear and some of the scrubs. This nice big scrubs will be available too for a price. So if you want to check my Instagram account, that's Sanctuary Plastic Surgery, and then you'll see a link to my ebook.
That sounds good. We'll take you up on it. All right, next story. This goes kind of under the radar. It went on in December. It was a couple of breast implant litigation cases, which, you know, we haven't seen a lot of that recently, but there's two cases, and actually in both cases the defense was successful in defending the breast implant manufacturer. But Jason, you know, what do you think about this?
So I read this, and I was like really bored reading these legal ramifications of people trying to sue the implant manufacturers based on technicalities, and it was thrown out on a technicality. So, you know, the synopsis I get from this is that you're going to get nowhere in 2019 if you try to sue an implant manufacturer. It's not going to happen. You're better off suing the people who will run you off the road or something like that. But, you know, there's good lawyers and there's good data and they're safe, and you're probably not going to get anywhere if you try to sue them because you think the product is bad. That's what I got out of that story.
Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, like it always is, a malaccurrence isn't a malpractice, and you know, the hype can occur on the internet. It gets people fired up, and they have a problem. And so many people think they should deserve not to have any problems, and they try to find blame for it. The problem is with breast implants today, although there's a social media, you know, discussion that goes on and people get fired up, and there's special interest groups that, you know, have it out for breast implants, the data and the science are so strong as it relates to breast implants that, you know, if you're just going to do it on a whim, it's going to be really, really hard, because they've been so studied and so researched for so long compared to almost everything else that we do in medicine, that you know, makes it really tough for a plaintiff. Yeah,
Bruce, what are your thoughts on this deal?
Well, I would say two things. One is the plaintiffs, some of these younger plaintiffs and their attorneys don't have a lot of institutional memory regarding this.
Right.
Some of us are old enough. We went through that first go around, and I think everybody learned from that, including the implant manufacturers. So they've got their I's dotted, T's crossed. Their information and their package inserts is pretty thorough, and they aren't going to set themselves up for an easy fall. So this isn't 1989 all over again. So.
Yeah, and I think you guys are exactly right. I mean, there's the science now is really sound, much different than it was, like you say, Bruce, in '89. So I think it's going to be a long road for the people that think they're going to make a quick money grab. So, well, let's move to the last story. I think this is the one that's coming down the road, especially there's some preliminary research being done in January, and then the hearing in France is in February. But recently, the French regulatory agency, as you all know, called for at least temporary removal of Allergan textured breast implants because they wanted more data. And that's actually been a source of misinformation, saying that they just took them off the market. They actually wanted more data and they wanted to have a hearing, so that implants were taken off the market until the hearing has time to play out. Brad, I want to have you start, but I think there's several important points that I think our viewers would want to hear about. But you've been very good at educating people on textured implants, and what you see is a lot of people saying, well, they took all these implants. First of all, it says all textured implants. This actually was a specific company's implants, Allergan's BIA-ALCL and microcell implants. But, you know, people say, oh, well, they just need to remove those implants from the market. And, you know, I think that there's a lot to discuss there. So why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, it's definitely a loaded discussion when we talk about textured and smooth implants, and definitely, in the United States, where we tend to use a lot more smooth implants, probably 90% or greater smooth implants, it's hard to understand what's the big deal about texture. We have to remember around the world that up until this point in time, it's been over 90% texture. For so many surgeons around the world, they've not even used a smooth implant or used very smooth implants. So you can imagine that would be sort of a scary thing to understand, what the changes would be for them if they no longer had texture. One thing that texture provides, it provides some things, that are unique, but what it does provide is the ability to use shaped devices. So for those people who you think would benefit from shaped implants can be beneficial. People that have abnormal chest walls, revisional cases where you really think the pocket's hard to control, you can stabilize implants with some texture with that. It's so, can you do it with smooth implants? Probably, but maybe not quite as well. Maybe you have to use other things like meshes to make up for that.
Yeah, and Bruce, that, like, for example, people say, oh, well, this is because they think that they cause breast implant ALCL. Actually, the Federal Agency didn't even mention ALCL in their communication. Basically, they just were wanting to have more data presented before they would issue a CE mark or decide if they were going to reissue the CE mark. But what do you have to say? And I think that people are really confused. There's a lot of misinformation. What do you have to say about this? And what do you say to patients? And what do you tell your patients?
Well, first of all, I think Brad nailed it there, that this is more of a bureaucratic response to the fact that Allergan didn't have the information that they had requested. So I think you need to view it from that perspective. I'm sure you guys are seeing this. I'm getting patients coming in and asking, what do I do? I've got a BIA-ALCL implant in. Do I need to remove them? And Bill, I know you and I and Steve Teitelbaum talked about this previously too. I think we have to really be cautious. And Bill, you've tried to make a point of putting risk in perspective. Even if you get to the point of saying that the risk of a BIA-ALCL is 1 in 3,000, the risk of dying in a house fire is 1 in 1,000. The risk of dying by drowning is 1 in 1,100. You do have to kind of put this in perspective. And I think we've all been concerned that there could be overreaction out of ignorance. And again, going back to what Brad said, I don't think that is what happened here. I think it's more of a regulatory issue, in terms of them getting the information they need. But there have been some of our colleagues that have called for banning of texture, and I think it's very short-sighted.
Jason, what are your comments?
I think the biggest risk is driving to my office during season in Florida.
Right.
You got the old
No doubt.
Kids. It's pretty bad. Anyway, you guys have covered this, and we've covered this before. Listen, we really need to get through the bureaucratic nonsense that's happening around these textured implants. There's a role for textured implants. Personally, I'm not a big fan of textured implants. We've talked about this before, but there's definitely a role for them in plastic surgery, and there's a time when you need them. And everyone's got their flavors. They like chocolate, they like vanilla. I think there's different ways to approach, breast surgery, and then we should have as many options available for our patients as we can.
Even tampons, cause toxic shock syndrome, and people die from them, and they still sell those things. So I'm just saying that, risks are there, and they don't always pull products from the market because there's risk, because the risk is so small. And with good education, you can prevent the things and the issues that you have with it. Textured has, other issues too, and so does smooth implants. They each come with it. What we're trying to do is minimize the revision rate, the reoperative rates on patients, and surgeons and the patient together make the choice that's best for them to try to reduce that risk. For some patients, smooths are the perfect choice, but maybe they're not for other patients. And that for the surgeon and the patient, fully informed to be able to make that decision and not have that taken away from them, I think is extremely important, at least at this stage of the game.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and I think we can conclude on that, and we'll probably talk about this more in the future. So if you want to see more of this, you can see it on the plasticsurgerychannel.com.